I am sure my brothers and sisters from the media, you have covered us politicians for quite a long time. And you definitely know that as the elections near, we move, and especially politicians have the ability to again rejuvenate and come up with different slogans and such. And from where I start, the issue we are hearing about infrastructure fund and the graduates about it, it's just a preparation of campaign launch. Because we've been there before. I mean, we have had these kind of things. And I want to say that anyone who has the opportunity to be in government, a sitting government has no luxury in promises and has no luxury in giving grandiose plans. The precise reason a sitting government is given that position is not to keep on promising. They have the responsibility to keep on informing Kenyans on what they are doing, not what they intend to do. Because output is measured by what has already happened. Output is not measured by what by the amount of promises. And as we talk about the grand plans, now we are talking about trillions of funds. You know, it reminds me like what I said the other day when you were here, that a man in the house goes and calls their family for a meeting in the evening, and they go and sell to them an agenda of going to the moon. And to make it very real, they actually almost dressed in the astronaut's attire. But unfortunately, the people you are telling to go to the moon, some of them that evening, they haven't eaten, and some already have leaking roofs. So you sell to them a gratuitous idea, possibly for them to also forget the small problems they are going through, like the leaking roof, and of course, like having not eaten for several days. But unfortunately, even after selling that idea, after a day or two, they'll still remind you that even if you're going there, we haven't eaten, and our roofs are leaking. And I see that as Kenya in the current scenario, that we may come and sell grandiose ideas, and the government is coming to sell grandiose ideas so that Kenyans can lose track of the essentials. Because tell me, we sell $1 trillion shillings idea, yet our basics are declining. How do you tell Kenyans about $1 trillion plans or $1 trillion shillings plans when capitation is being cut? Essential social investment like education, and especially in capitation, is being reduced, and at the same time you are selling $1 trillion shillings plans. We sell about $1 trillion shillings plans and funds when a small thing like confirming 20,000 JSS teachers is still not being done. And those are the basics that the country must not lose track of, so that we don't get lost in political messaging of grandiose $1 trillion funds, and then we lose the essentials that put the Kenyan economy and its fabric in its strength. The other thing I would request, because Kenya is gearing up to launching $1 trillion funds now, the preamble of that should be first to inform Kenyans that the government has borrowed close to 4 trillion shillings in the 3 years and 2 months it has been around. I mean close to 4 trillion Kenya shillings. This is enough money, because as you read the PMF Act and all the laws of Kenya, borrowing should only happen for capital expenditure, which is for development. And if that is so, then Kenya has borrowed 4 trillion shillings in the last barely 3 years and 2 months. So that is enough money. And I want you to hear this, 4 trillion Kenya shillings is the money we have borrowed as a country. Close to 4 trillion in the last 3 years and 2 months. And 4 trillion shillings is the one we have borrowed, as I keep saying, in the official book of loans. There are other debts on the side which are borrowed illegally. So 4 trillion shillings, before we talk about the launching of trillion shillings fund, I would request those who are in government to come first and face Kenyans and tell them what the government has done with the 4 trillion Kenya shillings that Kenya has borrowed in the last 3 years and 2 months. And to put it into context, 4 trillion Kenya shillings borrowed in the last, or close to 4 trillion borrowed in the recent past. That is enough money to have made education free, basic education free. We actually need only a top-up for the entire 3 years that has been there. We only could have needed only 100 billion to make education totally free in terms of basic education. The money we have borrowed is enough to have made education in the tertiary institutions free for all the over 500 undergraduates in our universities, both in public and private. And to put it into context further, the 4 trillion borrowed, or close to 4 trillion, is money that it means that of the 290 constituencies in Kenya, each constituency should be having, beyond making education free in the basic and beyond making education free in the tertiary side of education, we would have enough money remaining for Kenyans to see a 12 billion shillings development in every constituency in Kenya. All the 290 constituencies. The close to 4 trillion you have borrowed, besides having been made it possible for basic education to be free and tertiary education to be free, every constituency would have been seeing 12 billion worth of development projects not being launched, but finished and completed. What are we talking about over 12 billion shillings? Every constituency in Kenya should be having a 100 kilometer of tarmac from the money we have borrowed in the last 3 years and 2 months alone. To highway standards, actually at 70 million per kilometer. Every constituency of all the 290 constituencies should be having a 100 kilometer road highway project being seen by the people who pay taxes. Every constituency should be having a 1 billion worth of a water project. Every constituency should be having a 1 billion worth of an irrigation project. Every constituency should be having over 200 schemes of rural electrification in the only money we have borrowed. So my question today is this. We are coming to launch a trillion fund in Kenya today, or we are planning to do that. Can the government first face Kenyans and explain one sequentially from number one? Where has the 4 trillion Kenya shillings the government has borrowed gone to? Because as we talk about what we want to raise, can we first audit what we have already incurred so that we see the better way of moving forward as a country? The other thing, we must cease to become politicians all the time as leaders and become leaders instead. Because, you know, the issue of promising all the time. I'm MP for Kiharu. If I call a baraza in Kiharu and only sell what I want to do, what does that mean about what I have done? It means then I have nothing much to talk about in terms of what I have done. And therefore, so in the national scale, the government has a responsibility of telling Kenyans the kind of development we have seen for the last 3 years and 2 months. So that even as we talk about where we are going, can we first audit whether we have been prudent enough with the resources that Kenya has raised. And I want to repeat again for clarity. Kenya has borrowed close to 4 trillion shillings in the last 3 years and 2 months. And according to the rules of Kenya, the money we borrow should go directly into capital expenditure, which is development. So before we launch grandiose plans of trillion funds, can we first face Kenyans, and can the government face Kenyans and tabulate how they have used the 4 trillion Kenya shillings Kenya has borrowed in the recent past? And I've put it into context. I'm repeating it because it doesn't seem real, but it is a reality. That the 4 trillion Kenya shillings Kenya has borrowed is enough to have made education free, both basic and tertiary. And the change that remains, even if we divide out of the 290 constituencies, we should be having 12 billion worth of completed projects across the country. 12 billion worth in every constituency means 100 kilometers of road in every constituency in Kenya at 70 million per kilometer. That is highway standards. We should be having a 1 billion worth of a water project, a 1 billion worth of an irrigation project. We should be having over 200 schemes completed, electricity rectification schemes, and still we'll be remaining with change. If we can't explain to Kenyans the money that has already passed through the government hands where it has gone, what is the business then of coming to again sell grandiose plans of trillions of shillings when we can't account for what we have already received, and especially through borrowing alone? And lastly, out of the close to 4 trillion Kenya shillings we have borrowed, everything that Kenyans are seeing is not part of that money. Every ongoing road project in Kenya, especially completion of the road projects that are ongoing, that's a separate loan called securitization, which is illegal. When you see stadiums being constructed in Kenya, that is also not part of this 4 trillion. That's another borrowing called Talanta Board. When you hear about a program called Nyota, the one for alleviating unemployment in terms of the youth, that's also not part of that money. That's money we are receiving from World Bank. So Kenyans deserve to know, before you tell us about trillion funds that you want to launch, can we first account for the 4 trillion Kenya shillings the country has borrowed in the recent past? Very lastly, it is important for us to be data-driven as leaders. You know, we keep saying that 10,000 kilometers of roads were constructed from 2013 to 2012 in Kenya. That is incorrect. And I would challenge the government to actually tabulate the roads that we keep hearing of 10,000 kilometers of road. Because I know and I have the data, it is less than a third of that. And I also want to put it very clearly. And anyone with a conflicting facts can table them. I have said that, and I have stated that we have borrowed close to 4 trillion Kenya shillings. But if you fast check, you do fact finding, how many kilometers of road has Kenya built from 2022 to date? And especially from newly signed contracts. Newly signed. It is less than 1,200 kilometers across the country. It is less than 1,200 kilometers of tarmac road we have built from 2012 to today out of newly signed contracts. So, my challenge is accountability. Before we talk about trillion shillings plans and funds, it is important we put into context to Kenyans that you have already borrowed 4 trillion shillings, and Kenyans deserve that money to be accounted for. And that is my challenge. That I hope in the launch of that fund, the first preamble will be about being accountable for the amount of money Kenya has borrowed, because this is the burden for Kenyans today and also a burden for Kenyans.